3 weeks before our wedding, found my fiancée Sarah hunched over her laptop at 2 in the morning, frantically typing messages to someone named David Rodriguez. The screen illuminated her face as she wrote, "The invitations need to capture our entire love story, David. You understand our connection better than anyone." My blood went cold when I realized she wasn't talking about our connection, she was talking about theirs. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I should have known something was wrong when Sarah suddenly became obsessed with our wedding invitations. For months, she'd been dismissive about wedding planning, claiming her marketing job at Prestige Marketing Group was too demanding for such details. "Michael, you're the designer," she'd say, with a wave of her hand. "Handle the creative stuff." But 3 weeks before our ceremony at that beautiful Napa Valley vineyard, she developed an urgent need for invitation perfection. "Enough," Sarah announced she'd found an amazing designer who specialized in luxury wedding stationery. "His portfolio is incredible," she gushed, showing me elegant samples on her phone. "David Rodriguez. He's worked with celebrities and Fortune 500 executives. We need someone at this level for our big day." I remember feeling slightly insulted. I'd been running Chen Creative for 6 years, building a reputation for sophisticated design work throughout Seattle. My studio had created campaigns for tech startups, restaurant brands, and even some high-profile nonprofits. The idea that my own fiancé didn't trust me to design our wedding invitations stung, but I pushed the feeling aside. Sarah had always been particular about appearances, especially since her father, Robert Williams, was a prominent businessman who'd be hosting many influential guests. "How much does this David cost?" I asked, practical as always. "Don't worry about money," Sarah replied quickly. "Daddy said to spare no expense for his little girl's perfect day." The warning signs were there, but love makes you blind to red flags. Sarah began spending hours reviewing invitation concepts, questing revision after revision from this mysterious David. She'd disappear into her home office for entire evenings, claiming to be collaborating on the vision. When I offered to help her give feedback, she'd brush me off. "You wouldn't understand the aesthetic we're going for," she'd say dismissively. The night I discovered the truth, I'd gotten up for water and noticed the glow from Sarah's laptop in our living room. Curiosity got the better of me when I saw her intense concentration in the late hour. From behind her shoulder, I caught glimpses of their message thread. David wasn't just designing invitations, they were crafting some kind of romantic narrative together. "The calligraphy should evoke the passion we felt during those college years," Sarah had written. "Remember how we used to dream about our future together? Let's weave that energy into every detail." My stomach dropped. College years. They had history. I cleared my throat softly, and Sarah slammed the laptop shut like she'd been caught stealing. Her face flushed crimson as she spun around to face me. "Michael, you scared me. I was just reviewing some design options." At 2 in the morning, David works unconventional hours. He's very in demand. Not a lie hung in the air between us. I knew Sarah well enough to recognize her tells, the way she touched her neck when nervous, how her voice pitched slightly higher when fabricating stories. Something significant was happening behind my back. The next day, while Sarah was at work, I did what any suspicious partner would do. I investigated. A quick Google search revealed David Rodriguez wasn't just any wedding invitation designer. He was Sarah's ex-boyfriend from college, a freelance artist who'd been struggling to make ends meet until very recently. His social media showed a dramatic uptick in luxury projects and expensive lifestyle posts, all coinciding with when Sarah hired him. Digging deeper, I found old photos of them together at University of Washington. It dated for 3 years, apparently quite seriously, before breaking up during senior year. Sarah had never mentioned David specifically, though she'd referenced having a serious relationship in college that ended badly. The pieces started connecting in disturbing ways. Sarah's sudden interest in invitation perfection, her secretive behavior, the expensive choice of designer. Despite my professional capabilities, she wasn't just hiring her ex for his skills. She was orchestrating some kind of reunion under the guise of our wedding preparations. I felt sick imagining them bonding over fonts and paper textures while planning my wedding. Were they reminiscing about their own relationship dreams while designing announcements for mine? The intimate nature of wedding invitations, capturing a couple's love story in elegant script, made their collaboration feel like emotional infidelity. That evening, I confronted Sarah directly. She was reviewing proofs when I sat down across from our dining table, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know who David Rodriguez really is." Sarah's hand froze over the invitation samples. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Michael, I can explain, can you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you hired your college boyfriend to design our wedding invitations without telling me about your history. It's not what you think." Sarah's voice took on that defensive tone I'd learned to recognize. "Yes, David and I dated in college, but that was almost a decade ago. Hired him because he's genuinely talented, not because of our past." "Then why hide it? Why all the secrecy and late-night collaborations?" "Because I knew you'd react. Exactly like this. You'd make it about jealousy instead of appreciating that I want our invitations to be perfect." Her deflection only made things worse. Instead of acknowledging the deception, Sarah was making me the villain for being uncomfortable with the situation. This was classic Sarah turning accusations back on the accuser when caught in questionable behavior. "How much are you paying him?" "That's not relevant. How much, Sarah?" She hesitated. $15,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $15,000 for wedding invitations was obscene, especially when your fiancé ran a design studio. That amount could have covered our entire honeymoon. Instead, Sarah was essentially funding her ex-boyfriend's lifestyle while excluding me from our own wedding preparations. $15,000. "Sarah, I could have designed something beautiful for the cost of printing. This isn't about saving money. This is about having the best, most meaningful invitations possible. David understands the emotional significance. Of course he does. He's your ex-boyfriend." We stared at each other across the table, surrounded by elegant invitation samples that now felt like evidence of betrayal. The beautiful calligraphy and premium paper stock represented more than wedding stationery they symbolized. Sarah's willingness to prioritize her past relationship over our present one. What hurt most wasn't the money or even the deception. It was the realization that Sarah had created an intimate creative partnership with another man while shutting me out completely. She'd spent weeks collaborating with David on capturing their vision for our wedding, treating me like an unwelcome third party in my own marriage preparations. That night, as Sarah slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, wondering how many other secrets she'd been keeping. If she could orchestrate such an elaborate deception over wedding invitations, what else was she hiding? The woman I'd planned to marry in 3 weeks suddenly felt like a stranger. The morning after our confrontation, Sarah acted like nothing had happened. She hummed while making coffee, chatted about weekend plans, and kissed my cheek before heading to work. Her casual demeanor after such a significant argument told me everything I needed to know about how seriously she took my concerns.
Ow!
That day at Chen Creative, trying to focus on client work. But my mind kept wandering to those elegant invitation samples scattered across our dining table. Each piece represented hours of collaboration between Sarah and David. Intimate discussions about fonts and layouts while planning my wedding. The professional in me had to admit the designs were stunning, but that only made the betrayal sting worse. Around noon, my business partner Jessica Park knocked on my office door. She'd been my closest friend since college and had an uncanny ability to read my moods. "You look like someone stole your favorite coffee mug and replaced it with decaf," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. I found myself telling her everything. Jessica listened without interruption, her expression growing more incredulous with each detail. "Let me get this straight," she said when I finished. "Sarah hired her ex-boyfriend to design your wedding. Invitations, paid him $15,000, and has been secretly collaborating with him for weeks, while completely excluding you from the process. That's the situation. And when you confronted her, she made you feel guilty for being upset about it. Pretty much." Jessica shook her head slowly. "Michael, this isn't about wedding invitations. This is about respect, trust, and transparency. In your relationship, the fact that she's gaslighting you instead of acknowledging the problem is a massive red flag. Her words hit harder than I expected. Hearing the situation summarized by someone outside, it made the dysfunction impossible to ignore. That evening, I decided to do some detective work. While Sarah showered, I carefully examined the invitation. Proofs she'd left on the kitchen counter. The designs were indeed beautiful, but as I studied them more closely, disturbing details emerged. The color palette wasn't just elegant, it was specific. Deep burgundy and gold, the exact colors of University of Washington's school spirit gear. The monogram intertwining our initials was rendered in a style I recognized from David's college art projects, samples of which I'd found during my online investigation. It's most troubling of all, the romantic quote Sarah had chosen for our invitations was from a Pablo Neruda poem. And David's social media showed multiple posts featuring the same poet during their college years together. Our wedding invitations weren't just designed by Sarah's ex-boyfriend. They were infused with their shared history and inside references. She was essentially using our marriage announcement to commemorate her previous relationship. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I photographed the proofs with my phone, documenting the details that would have been meaningless to most people, but told a clear story to anyone who knew their background. The evidence painted a picture of two people reliving their college romance through the medium of my wedding stationery. The next day brought even more revelations. Sarah's assistant, Emma Thompson, called my studio around 3 in the afternoon. Her voice professionally neutral, but carrying an undertone of awkwardness. "Michael, I'm calling to schedule a meeting between you, Sarah, and David Rodriguez to finalize the invitation details. Sarah wants everyone on the same page before we go to print." The audacity was breathtaking. Sarah wanted me to sit in a room with her ex-boyfriend and pretend to collaborate on invitations they'd already designed together. It was performative inclusion at its most insulting. "When did Sarah want to schedule this meeting?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Tomorrow at 4. At David's studio in Capitol Hill. Sarah says it's important that you see his workspace to understand the level of craftsmanship involved." I almost laughed. Sarah wanted me to tour her ex-boyfriend's studio like I was some kind of client being sold on his services. The manipulation was so blatant it bordered on comedy. "I'll be there," I told Emma, already formulating a plan. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting Sarah privately again, I chose a different approach. If she wanted to involve me in her charade, I'd participate, but on my terms. I spent hours that evening, crafting a response that would expose the entire situation while maintaining my professional dignity. Using my design skills, I created a counterproposal that would force everyone involved to confront the reality of what was happening. The next afternoon, I arrived at David's studio 15 minutes early. The space was exactly what I'd expected, Anne. Artfully cluttered warehouse conversion in one of Seattle's trendiest neighborhoods. It's filled with expensive equipment that someone struggling financially shouldn't have been able to afford. David answered the door himself, and I got my first look at the man who'd been secretly collaborating with my fiancée. He was shorter than I'd imagined, with the kind of carefully curated casual appearance that took significant effort to achieve. His handshake was firm but brief, and his eyes couldn't quite meet mine. "Michael, great to finally meet you. Sarah's told me so much about you." "I'm sure she has," I replied, noting how he used her first name with familiar ease. Sarah arrived, precisely on time, bringing with her a folder of additional proofs and what appeared to be champagne to celebrate our collaboration. She seemed genuinely excited about bringing us together, which made her obliviousness to the situation even more troubling. "Isn't David's studio amazing?" she gushed, gesturing around the space like a proud gallery owner. "This is where all the magic happens." David gave us a tour of his workspace, explaining his design process with the enthusiasm of someone who rarely had an audience for his work. Sarah hung on every word, asking detailed questions about techniques and materials. Watching them interact, I could see the ghost of their college relationship, the way she tilted her head when listening to him, how he unconsciously adjusted his posture when she spoke. When we finally sat down to review the invitations, David spread the proofs across his main work table with ceremonial precision. Sarah positioned herself between us, one hand resting near David's as she pointed out specific details. "See how David captured the emotional essence of our journey together?" she said, indicating the flowing script that spelled out our names. "He really understands how to translate feelings into visual elements." I studied the designs again, noting details I'd missed before. The paper stock was identical to what David had used for a gallery show announcement 2 years prior. The font pairing matched his personal branding. Even the layout followed his signature style. These weren't custom wedding invitations. They were David Rodriguez originals with our names substituted. "They're certainly distinctive," I said carefully. "Very much in David's personal style." "That's exactly what we wanted," Sarah beamed. "Something that would stand out from typical wedding invitations." "It definitely stands out," I agreed, pulling out my phone. In fact, I was so inspired by David's approach that I created something myself. I opened the image I'd prepared. The night before, a mock invitation designed in my own style, clean and modern, with our actual love story reflected in the details. The color palette represented our shared favorite travel destinations. The typography referenced the first concert we attended together. The layout incorporated subtle elements from my studio's best work. "This is what I would have created if you'd asked," I said, placing my phone on the table between them. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stared at my design, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been shame. David shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing the tension but not understanding its source. "It's nice," Sarah said finally, her voice strained. "But we're already committed to David's vision, are we? Because looking at these invitations, I see David's vision everywhere. His color preferences, his typography choices, his layout style. I even recognize the paper stock from his previous projects." I picked up one of the proofs, pointing to specific elements. "This isn't our love story, Sarah. This is David's artistic signature with our names attached." David's face went pale. As he realized I'd done my homework, Sarah's hand moved away from his as the full implications of my words sank in. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," David began, but I held up my hand. "No misunderstanding. You're a talented designer, David, and these invitations showcase your skills beautifully. But they're not appropriate for our wedding because they're not about us. They're about you and Sarah's shared aesthetic from college." The truth hung in the air like smoke from a fire everyone was pretending not to smell. Sarah's carefully constructed fantasy was crumbling, and David was beginning to understand he'd been used as much as I had. "Michael, you're overanalyzing," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Am I? Then explain why our invitations feature University of Washington colors, your favorite Pablo Neruda quote from college, and design elements that match David's portfolio from when you two were dating." Sarah's face went white. In her eagerness to recreate her college romance, she'd left a trail of evidence that even she couldn't deny. The woman who'd built her career on carefully crafted marketing messages had forgotten to cover her tracks in her personal life. David stood up abruptly, clearly wanting to escape the increasingly uncomfortable situation. "Maybe we should reschedule this meeting. Give everyone time to think things through." "It won't be necessary," I said, standing as well. "I've thought things through quite thoroughly." Who was still staring at the invitation proofs, like they might rearrange themselves into something less incriminating. "I'm withdrawing from this collaboration. You and David can create whatever invitations you want, but they won't be announcing our wedding." The finality in my voice seemed to shock Sarah back to awareness. "What do you mean, Michael? We can work this out. Can incorporate your ideas. It's too late for that." I picked up my phone and headed toward the door. "When you decide whether you want to marry me or relive your college years with David, let me know. But I won't participate in this performance anymore." As I walked out of David's studio, I heard Sarah calling my name, but I didn't turn around. The cool Seattle air felt liberating after the suffocating atmosphere of manufactured collaboration inside. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe clearly. My phone started buzzing before I reached my car, Sarah calling repeatedly, but I wasn't ready to hear her explanations or justifications. The evidence spoke louder than any words she could offer, and I needed time to process what I'd learned about the woman I'd planned to marry. That evening, alone in our apartment, I made a decision that would change everything. If Sarah wanted to play games with our relationship, I'd show her how those games actually worked when someone else controlled the rules. I slept on Jessica's couch that night, unable to face returning to the apartment I shared with Sarah. My phone buzzed constantly with calls and texts. I couldn't bring myself to read them. Jessica made coffee in the morning and sat across from me at her kitchen table, waiting patiently for me to speak. "I can't marry her," I finally said, the words feeling strange in my mouth after 3 years of relationship and 6 months of wedding planning. "I know," Jessica replied simply. "The question is what you're going to do about it." The wedding was supposed to happen in 2 weeks. Deposits had been paid, guests had made travel arrangements, and Sarah's father had already transferred money. For the rehearsal dinner, canceling felt like detonating a bomb in the middle of both our lives, but continuing felt like swallowing poison. Over the next few days, I stayed at Jessica's while Sarah left increasingly frantic voicemails. She alternated between anger and pleading, sometimes within the same message. She claimed I was overreacting, that David meant nothing to her, that she'd fire him immediately if that's what I wanted. But her promises felt hollow, because she still didn't understand the core issue wasn't David himself. It was her willingness to deceive me and then gaslight me when confronted. On Thursday, exactly 1 week before our scheduled wedding, Sarah showed up at Chen Creative. I was working late, trying to lose myself in a rebranding project for a local restaurant. When she walked through the front door like she owned the place, "We need to talk," she announced, her voice carrying the authoritative tone she used in business meetings. "There's nothing left to discuss. Don't be ridiculous, Michael. We're getting married in 7 days. Whatever issues you have with the invitations, we can fix them." Her casual dismissal of everything that had happened reinforced my decision to end things. Sarah genuinely believed this was about wedding stationery rather than fundamental trust and respect. "This isn't about invitations, Sarah. This is about honesty. This is about you hiring your ex-boyfriend for an intimate creative collaboration while lying to me about your history. This is about you spending $15,000 of your father's money to fund David's lifestyle. This is about you gaslighting me when I confronted you instead of acknowledging what you'd done." Sarah's face cycled through emotions: surprise, anger, and finally calculation. I could see her shifting into damage control mode the same way she handled crisis management for her clients. "Fine, you're right. I should have told you about David from the beginning. But I knew you'd react exactly like this, so I chose to handle it privately. That was a mistake in judgment, not malicious deception." Even her apology was manipulative, framing her lies as reasonable responses to my predictable jealousy. She wasn't sorry for betraying my trust. She was sorry for getting caught. "I'm calling off the wedding," I said quietly. The words hung between us like a challenge. Sarah stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating whether I was bluffing. "You don't mean that. You're upset. Which I understand, but you're not thinking clearly. We've built something real together, Michael. Don't throw that away over wedding invitations." "Not throwing anything away. You already did that." Sarah's composure finally cracked. "You're being completely unreasonable. I made one mistake. You made dozens of mistakes. Every lie, every secret meeting, every time you chose David's vision over mine. Every time you made me feel crazy for being uncomfortable with the situation. This wasn't one mistake, Sarah. This was a pattern of choices that showed me exactly where I stand in your priorities." She tried several more angles appealing to our shared history, mentioning the money already spent, reminding me of how good we looked together professionally. When none of that worked, she resorted to threats. "If you embarrass me by canceling this wedding, you'll regret it. My family has connections throughout this city. Your little design studio won't survive the reputation damage." There it was. Real Sarah Williams. When charm and manipulation failed, she defaulted to intimidation. The woman I'd planned to marry was threatening to destroy my business because I wouldn't participate in her charade. "Get out," I said calmly. "Michael, get out of my studio, Sarah, and don't come back." After she left, I sat alone in my office, staring at the city lights through my window. The weight of canceling a wedding felt enormous, but the weight of marrying someone who'd threatened my livelihood over a relationship conflict felt infinitely heavier. I called the vendors the next morning. The caterer was understanding, especially when I offered to forfeit our deposit rather than demanding a refund. The florist had worked with Sarah's family before and seemed unsurprised by the cancellation. The vineyard coordinator in Napa was professionally sympathetic, noting they'd seen their share of last-minute changes. The hardest call was to Sarah's. Father Robert Williams had always been cordial to me, if somewhat distant. He listened without interruption as I explained the wedding was off. "I'm sorry to hear that, Michael." He asked what happened. I gave him a sanitized version, focusing on fundamental incompatibility rather than the specifics of Sarah's deception. He was quiet for a long moment. "I appreciate you calling me directly rather than leaving this for Sarah to handle. That shows character." His response surprised me. I'd expected anger or attempts to salvage the situation. "I know my daughter," he continued. "She's brilliant at marketing, but sometimes applies those same manipulation tactics to her personal relationships. I'm sorry you experienced that." After hanging up, I felt lighter than I had in months. The dread that had been building since discovering Sarah's deception was finally lifting. Jessica suggested I take some time away from Seattle while the gossip died down. She'd been accepted to a design residency in Barcelona and encouraged me to apply for the same program. "You've been running Chen Creative for 6 years, she said. "When's the last time you focused on your own artistic development instead of client work?" She was right. I'd built a successful business, but had stopped pushing my creative boundaries. The prospect of studying design in Europe, surrounded by other artists and free from the constraints of client expectations, felt like exactly what I needed. The application process for the Barcelona Design Institute was intensive, requiring portfolio submissions, essays, and video interviews. Working on the materials reminded me why I'd fallen in love with design in the first place, the challenge of solving complex problems through visual communication. The satisfaction of creating something beautiful and functional. 3 weeks after calling off my wedding, I received an acceptance letter from the Institute. The program would last 18 months, covering everything from traditional printmaking to digital innovation. More importantly, it would put an ocean between me and the wreckage of my relationship with Sarah. Closing Chen Creative temporarily was bittersweet. I'd built something meaningful, but I also recognized that staying in Seattle meant staying trapped in old patterns. Jessica agreed to handle our existing clients and maintain the business relationships while I was away. The night before my departure, I walked through Capitol Hill one last time, passing David's studio. The space was dark, and I wondered if his collaboration with Sarah had survived my departure. It didn't matter anymore, but I found myself curious about whether they'd discovered anything real beneath their manufactured nostalgia. At SeaTac Airport the next morning, I felt a freedom I hadn't experienced since college. Everything I owned fit into 2 suitcases and a carry-on bag. No commitments, no expectations, no one depending on me for anything except my own growth and development. Barcelona welcomed me with warm Mediterranean air and architecture that made every street feel like a work of art. The Institute was housed in a converted monastery, its ancient stones providing a stunning backdrop for cutting-edge design work. My cohort included 24 designers from around the world, each bringing unique perspectives and cultural influences to our collaborative projects. For the first time in years, I was creating art for the sake of creation rather than commercial viability. I experimented with letterpress printing, explored the intersection of digital and analog techniques, pushed my aesthetic in directions I'd never considered during my client-focused career. Mark Foster, a British designer in my cohort, became a close friend and frequent collaborator. He'd left London after his own relationship imploded. We bonded over late-night conversations about starting over in your 30s. Mark specialized in experimental typography. Working with him challenged me to think differently about how text could convey emotion and meaning. 6 months into the program, I received an email from Sarah. She'd found my Barcelona address somehow and wanted to clear the air between us. The message was carefully crafted, full of the same marketing speak she used professionally. She claimed to miss our friendship and hoped we could eventually reconnect as mature adults who'd simply grown apart. I deleted the email without responding. Sarah's attempt to rewrite our history as a mutual growing apart rather than her betrayal of trust showed she still didn't understand what had happened between us. More importantly, I no longer cared whether she understood. My life in Barcelona was too rich and fulfilling to waste energy on her revisionist narrative. The Institute's final project required each student to create a comprehensive brand identity. For a fictional company, I chose to design materials for an imaginary publishing house that specialized in translated literature, allowing me to explore how different cultural design traditions could be synthesized into something new and meaningful. Working on that project, I realized how much I'd grown during my time in Barcelona. The designer who'd arrived 18 months earlier had been technically proficient, but creatively constrained by commercial expectations and relationship drama. The person finishing the program had rediscovered his artistic voice and learned to trust his instincts again. Mark and I decided to return to the United States together, planning to establish a joint practice that would combine our individual strengths. He'd received interest from several American companies impressed by our collaborative work, and I was ready to bring my expanded skill set back to the Pacific Northwest. As our plane descended into Los Angeles, where we decided to establish our new studio, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. 18 months earlier, I'd been preparing to marry someone who'd valued her ex-boyfriend's artistic vision over mine. Now I was landing in a new city with a creative partner who respected my work and a portfolio that represented the best of my artistic development. The transformation felt complete, but I had no idea that the final chapter of my story with Sarah was still waiting to be written. 2 years after leaving Seattle, I stood in the lobby of the Beverly Hills Hotel, adjusting my tie before the American Design Awards ceremony. Mark and I had been nominated in 3 categories for our work with Meridian Films, a boutique production company that specialized in international cinema. Our rebrand had helped them secure distribution deals with major streaming platforms, and the industry had taken notice. The journey from Barcelona to this moment had been extraordinary. Mark and I launched Chen Creative in a converted warehouse in downtown Los Angeles, initially surviving on small projects and freelance work. Our breakthrough came when Elena Vasquez, a prominent film producer, hired us to design materials for her latest project. She'd been impressed by my Barcelona portfolio, particularly the publishing house concept that had incorporated global design influences. "Your work has a sophisticated international sensibility that's rare in this market," Elena had told us during our first meeting. "Most American designers think globally means adding a few accent marks to Times New Roman." That project led to others, and within 18 months, we'd built a client roster that included entertainment companies, luxury brands, and cultural institutions.
Modern.
But with unexpected cultural references and experimental. Typography had struck a chord with clients who wanted to stand out in an increasingly crowded marketplace. Tonight's award ceremony represented validation that we'd made the right choice in establishing ourselves outside Seattle's conservative design scene. As Mark and I entered the ballroom, I recognized faces from design magazines and industry publications. This was the level of professional recognition I dreamed about during those long nights in Barcelona, working on projects that pushed my creative boundaries. Michael Chen, voice behind me, belonged to David Kim, editor of Design Quarterly, one of the industry's most influential publications. "I've been following your work since the Meridian rebrand. Brilliant stuff. Love to set up an interview about your transition from regional practice to international recognition." As we chatted about potential feature stories, I noticed a familiar figure across the room. Jessica Park, my former business partner from Seattle, was talking animatedly with a group of designers near the bar. She spotted me and waved excitedly, weaving through the crowd to reach us. "Michael, I can't believe you're here. You look incredible," she said, pulling me into a hug. "And you must be Mark. Jessica Park, I've heard so much about you." "Good, I hope," Mark replied with his characteristic British charm. "Better than good. Michael's been sending me updates on your projects, but seeing you both here at the awards makes it real. You've actually done it, built something amazing." From scratch, Jessica looked different than I remembered. More confident, more polished. Success suited her. "How are things in Seattle?" I asked. "Actually, that's part of why I'm here. I sold the agency 6 months ago to Whitman Creative Group. They wanted our client list and offered enough money that I couldn't refuse. I'm launching something new. focused specifically on entertainment branding. That's fantastic. You always had a knack for understanding how creative industries market themselves. Speaking of marketing, Jessica's expression grew mischievous. You'll never guess who's been trying to reconnect with me ever since news of your nomination hit the trade publications. I didn't need to guess. Even after 2 years, the mention of Sarah's name would have been obvious from Jessica's tone. She reached out about 3 weeks ago, claiming she wanted to congratulate you on your success through mutual friends. When I didn't respond, she tried a different approach, suggesting that Seattle's design community would benefit from your expertise if you ever considered returning. Let me guess she conveniently forgot that she threatened to destroy my business when I called off our wedding. Oh, it gets better. She's been telling people that you two had an amicable split due to career differences. According to her version, you mutually decided to postpone the wedding so you could both focus on professional growth. Mark raised an eyebrow. That's quite a revision of history. Sarah's always been talented at rewriting narratives to suit her needs, I said. How's she doing professionally? Jessica's grin widened. That's the interesting part. Remember how she threatened to use her family's connections to damage your reputation? Well, karma has a sense of humor. About 8 months after you left, Robert Williams was investigated for tax evasion. Nothing criminal, but embarrassing enough that several of his business relationships became liabilities rather than assets. Sarah's father got in trouble, big time. The IRS found irregularities in his company's charitable donations. Apparently, he'd been inflating contributions to reduce tax liability. The penalties were massive, and the scandal made business news throughout the Pacific Northwest. Companies that had worked with him to gain social credibility suddenly wanted distance. This news surprised me. Robert Williams had always seemed like the epitome of successful, legitimate business practice. Learning about his ethical shortcuts felt like discovering another layer of deception in Sarah's family. How did that affect Sarah? Prestige Marketing Group lost 3 major clients within 6 months. Turns out, some of their contracts were contingent on Robert's endorsement and connections. When his reputation became toxic, Sarah couldn't deliver the access she'd promised. The family connections that were supposed to destroy my business ended up destroying hers instead. Exactly. She had to lay off half her staff and move to a smaller office. From what I hear, she's been scrambling to rebuild ever since. I could respond. The ceremony began. Mark and I found our seats at a table with other nominees, and I tried to focus on the presentations rather than dwelling on Sarah's professional struggles. Success felt sweeter when earned through talent rather than inherited connections. And tonight represented the culmination of genuine artistic growth. When our category was announced, Mark squeezed my shoulders supportively. The presenter, a legendary designer whose work had inspired me since college, opened the envelope with theatrical flair. The award for excellence in brand identity goes to Chen Creative for their work with Meridian Films. The applause felt surreal as Mark and I walked to the stage. Standing behind that podium, looking out at an audience of peers who respected our work, I felt completely removed from the person who'd discovered his fiancée collaborating with her boyfriend on wedding invitations. That version of myself felt like a character from someone else's story. This recognition belongs to everyone who took risks to support innovative design, I said into the microphone. 2 clients brave enough to trust emerging studios, 2 collaborators who pushed us beyond our comfort zones. To anyone who's ever had to start over and discovered that endings can become beginnings. After the ceremony, the celebration continued at an exclusive after-party in the hotel's penthouse suite. Industry leaders, potential clients, and fellow designers mingled while Los Angeles sparkled below us through floor-to-ceiling windows. Mark was deep in conversation with representatives from a major streaming service who were interested in our approach to international market branding. Around midnight, as the party was winding down, my phone buzzed with a notification, as someone had tagged me on social media. Congratulatory post about our award win. Scrolling through the comments, I noticed several from designers I'd worked with in Seattle, all expressing genuine excitement about my success. Then I saw it. A comment from Sarah Williams herself. So proud to see Seattle talent making waves. In LA, Michael Chen has always been destined for greatness. Congratulations on this well-deserved recognition. The audacity was breathtaking. After 2 years of silence, She was publicly claiming credit for my success, positioning herself as a supportive mentor rather than the person whose betrayal had catalyzed my departure from Seattle. Even more manipulative, she was using my achievement to enhance her own reputation by association. I showed the comment to Mark, who shook his head in amazement. Does she actually believe that narrative, or is this purely strategic? With Sarah, it's impossible to tell where self-deception ends and manipulation begins. Jessica appeared beside us, slightly tipsy from champagne, but still sharp enough to notice my expression. You look like someone just told you the award was a mistake. I showed her Sarah's comment, and she laughed so loudly that several nearby conversations paused. The woman has absolutely no shame. She's been telling anyone who will listen that your success validates her eye for talent. It's conveniently omitting the part where she tried to sabotage your career. It doesn't matter, I realized as I said it. Let her claim whatever narrative makes her feel better. Tonight isn't about our pasts, it's about the future Mark and I are building. But even as I said those words, I suspected my history with Sarah wasn't quite finished. Her public comment felt like an opening move in some larger game. And I had a feeling that winning a prestigious industry award had painted a target on my back that she couldn't resist aiming for. The ride back to our downtown loft was quiet, both Mark and I processing the significance of the evening. We'd officially arrived as major players in the design world, the opportunities that would have seemed impossible during those early months of struggling to establish ourselves in Los Angeles. What's next? Mark asked as we pulled up to our building. Everything, I replied, and for the first time in years, I truly believed it. Whatever games Sarah wanted to play, whatever revisionist history she needed to construct, was no longer the same person she'd manipulated and deceived. The man stepping out of that car was someone she'd never met, and I was curious to see how she'd handle meeting him for the first time. 3 months after the awards ceremony, Sarah made her move. Mark and I were reviewing proposals for a major tech company rebrand when my phone rang with a Seattle number I didn't recognize. Michael. This is Amanda Stevens from Pacific Northwest Business Journal. I'm working on a feature about Seattle entrepreneurs who've achieved national success. And your story with Chen Creative is exactly what our readers want to hear about. The interview request seemed legitimate until Amanda mentioned her angle. I'm particularly interested in exploring how your relationship with Sarah Williams at Prestige Marketing Group influenced your creative development. She speaks so highly of your collaborative years together. There it was. Sarah had carefully staged the interview, casting herself as a former mentor in my origin story. It was clever framing our complicated history through a respected business publication to bolster her professional image. I appreciate the interest, I told Amanda, the journalist, but I'd rather focus on my current work, not past relationships. Of course, she said. But readers love hearing about the relationships that support creative success. Ms. Williams mentioned she played a key role in encouraging your expansion beyond regional markets. The audacity of the lie was almost impressive. Sarah had once threatened to destroy my business when I refused to play along with her scheme involving her ex-boyfriend.
Ow.
She was trying to recast herself as the driving force behind my success. After the call, I recognized the brilliance of her tactic by presenting herself as my former collaborator. She was attempting to reclaim relevance through my accomplishments. For clients who had distanced themselves after her father's scandal, this narrative painted her as someone connected to award-winning talent. Mark found the whole thing amusing. She's relentless. What's your move?
It's time.
Sarah learned what happens when you try to manipulate someone who's outgrown the need for your approval. I called Amanda back that afternoon. I'd be happy to be interviewed, but I'll need full editorial control over any content about my personal history. I want to ensure accuracy. She agreed, likely sensing there was a better story here than Sarah's polished version. We spoke the following week over video. Amanda was sharp and thorough, asking about my journey from regional designer to international creative director. Then came the question I was prepared for. You've been connected professionally to Sarah Williams. Can you speak to that relationship? We were briefly engaged, I said. It ended when I discovered she'd secretly hired her ex-boyfriend to design our wedding invitations. That deception made it clear I needed to build my career on my own merit, not on borrowed credibility or tangled loyalties. Amanda blinked, processing the unexpected honesty. The experience taught me a lot about boundaries, artistic integrity, and the kind of partnerships I wanted to build. Sometimes the biggest setbacks are what push us forward. Which followed. Up. Is that what led you to launch Chen Creative in Los Angeles? I wanted to prove that talent and work ethic were enough, that I didn't need anyone's network or name to succeed. 2 weeks later, the article ran under the headline, "From Heartbreak to Hollywood, How Personal Betrayal Launched a Design." Dynasty. Amanda had written a powerful story, one that acknowledged Sarah's role, not as a mentor, but as the catalyst for my independence. And the fallout for Sarah was swift. Seattle's design community, long aware of the rumors, now had confirmation. Her carefully curated narrative crumbled. Social media erupted with conversations about ethics, integrity, and manipulation in professional spaces. Days later, I got a furious voicemail from Sarah, her calm completely gone. "You've destroyed everything I worked to rebuild," she screamed. "Everyone will see what a vindictive person you are." But her threats had lost their weight. Her influence had dried up, and her emotional unraveling only validated the story Amanda had published. The final blow came from David Rodriguez, Sarah's ex, and the designer she dragged into our engagement. He posted publicly, confirming Sarah had hired him because of their romantic past, and had even encouraged him to reference it in the design. "I should have said no," he wrote. "I was wrong to participate, and I apologize to Michael for that betrayal." Even her co-conspirator had walked away. That night, Jessica called me, laughing. "Have you seen Sarah's LinkedIn?" she scrapped. "Any mention of Prestige Marketing Group? Now she's calling herself a freelance brand consultant. The fall is complete." I almost feel sorry for her. I admitted I meant it. Her effort to attach herself to my success had only exposed how far she'd fallen. She tried to rewrite the past, but instead erased herself from the present. "Don't waste sympathy," Jessica said. She made her choices. These are the consequences. 6 months later, Mark and I signed our biggest contract yet, a global rebrand for a streaming platform launching in 12 countries. It would take us to London, Barcelona, and beyond, the same city where I'd rediscovered who I was. Now with a partner who respected both my work and my boundaries. That night, as we toasted our success at our favorite downtown spot, Mark raised his glass. To fresh starts and second chances. And to the worst moments becoming the best turning points. My phone buzzed. Sarah had sent a friend request. She'd moved to Portland, now working for a small nonprofit, her marketing career clearly over. I declined the request without hesitation. Some stories deserve to stay closed. Sarah Williams was a chapter I had already finished writing. The next morning, our project was featured in 3 international design journals. Mark was taking calls from new clients across Europe and Asia, opportunities I never imagined back when I found those wedding invitations. Looking back, I realized Sarah's betrayal had forced me to grow, to find my voice, and to build something that truly reflected who I was. Her attempts to control the narrative had only ensured her exclusion from it. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's thriving so completely that your success speaks louder than their manipulation. Their desperate attempts to stay relevant only underline how far you've outgrown them. As Mark and I walked back to the studio discussing global teams and new campaigns, I smiled. Sarah hadn't just failed to rewrite my story, she'd been edited out of it entirely. And that was the real victory. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.